Hi, my name is James Andriella, and you are listening to the Back to Human podcast. On today's episode, I have Army combat veteran, happy belated Veterans Day, by the way, brother, Jason Stauffer. Yeah. Jason graduated from Arizona State University, where he received his Bachelors of Science in Civil, Environmental, and Sustainable Engineering. Jason is also the president of Morzko Forge, which is a company that makes an amazing cold plunge, one that I've been using for the past 3 years, and it's capable of making its own ice. It's also equipped with ozone for disinfection, so you don't need to go to the store every day that you want to take a dip, and you can hop in whenever you want without needing to do frequent water changes. I've had Tom Seeger and Adrian Jezik of Morozko on the show previously. If you'd like to dive into more of the benefits of deliberate cold exposure and learn how Adrian was able to overcome 3 different autoimmune disorders, give those episodes a listen. On today's show, I have the third head of the dragon, that is Morozko, and we are going to take a plunge into his recent journey to sobriety from alcohol. Without further ado, Jason, welcome to the show, brother.
Hey, thanks, James, and thanks for reaching out.
So would you mind diving into a little bit of the history behind Morozko? I've heard the story before. I've listened to a few of your other podcasts. I think it's cool. Tom never really addressed this one. I think you probably tell it the best. So how did Morozko come about, and what's behind the name?
Yeah, and I'll try to, that's not the chief topic of our conversation today, although it's grown to be, its own podcast length origin story. So I'll try to see if I can kind of shorten the arc a little bit and just say that I became acutely aware that a lot of the disease states that we see in our industrialized society are themselves externalities or side effects from our lifestyle, from our technological lifestyle, from our industrial lifestyle, and our healthcare system, as well-meaning as everybody that I have run across in the healthcare system is missing the mark a lot in true kind of human health and wellness. It's become an industry or an institution that is evolved to almost exclusively be concerned with symptom management. And I always say it's the healthcare system is full. It's overflowing with good people who want to do good things. And the best thing that they know how to do is to make people more comfortable in their disease states, to reduce symptoms, to reduce pain. But there's more to that story. There's more to our capabilities in actually, reducing our own symptoms without pharmaceuticals or elective surgical procedures or things like that. And I started getting into that, and that's what led me to deliberate cold exposure. And then the company with the machine was solving a problem that we had. We wanted to be able to do ice baths whenever we want. I didn't want to get 200 pounds of ice once a week to get my, one ice bath. And so it was just a backyard engineering project of tearing apart refrigerators and making ourselves an all the time ice bath. And we just kind of ended up being on the tip of this cold rush of people waking up to this therapy. And this kind of seems like an explosion. I think it's still very small in the grand, 320 million Americans that there are, but seems like more and more people, it's becoming such a common household thing. Maybe not the practice, but people are aware of it. They're aware of all of us crazy people doing ice baths. And so it's just kind of perpetuated from there. And I think that's a good enough arc before we take up the entire hour on the origin. I will go into the origin of the name. So Morozko, and we went back and forth over what's the name of the company for a few days. But mythologies and stories are very important to us because we understand that the stories that we tell ourselves about who we are and how we associate to our environment, our community, our society are very powerful. And so I love mythologies and I love stories and I love digging in on the wisdoms and the little kernels of knowledge that you can find. And Morozko is a Russian fairy tale. There's a character. If you look at drawings of him, he's like a winter warlock or a Father Winter, Jack Frost type character. And there's a fairy tale that goes along with this. And there's a little girl who lives in the middle of the Russian forest with her father, her wicked stepmother, and her nasty stepsister. And the stepmother and the stepsister, they don't like her very much. They're very jealous of her. And so stepmother takes the little girl out in the middle of the forest and leaves her there to freeze to death. And Morozko comes around and he finds her and he's about to freeze her. But first he asks, child, are you warm? And the little girl answers him with stoicism and grace and says, yes, dear Morozko, I am warm enough. And so he doesn't freeze her. Instead, he brings her into his cottage, makes her a princess of the forest, and gives her all these jewels and all these gifts. And stepmother catches wind of this, that not only is the little girl not frozen to death as she intended, but Morozko has found her and brought her into his cottage and made her a princess and showered her with jewels and gifts. And so stepmother says, I'll recreate this. I'll take my own daughter. I'll leave her in the forest. Morozko will make her a princess, give her jewels and gifts, and I will be rich. And so she does this. And so the nasty stepsister is sitting in the middle of the forest and she's cold and she's shivering, and Morozko finds her and asks, child, are you warm? But this little girl, she's not stoic and she's not gracious. And so she kind of mouths off to him. And so he freezes her. Now, the origin of this mythology, it's got a very naughty list, nice list feel to it. And so the origin was probably just to get Russian children to not complain about being Russian children in the Russian winters. You know, if you complain about the cold, Morozko will freeze you. But if you are good and if you are warm enough, then you will get gifts and jewels. But what we take from the mythology is that if you meet the cold with stoicism and grace, it will bestow great gifts upon you. And so obviously our flagship product is the machine itself, the Morozko ice bath itself, but we also have the coaching and the guidance methodology that Adrian has developed, which is amazing. And so it's about not meeting the cold with competitiveness or with kind of a fight mentality, but surrendering to it and not jacking up our own cortisol levels in some sort of like competitive, I'm gonna take this ice bath, but surrendering and becoming meditative, which we find is extremely powerful. It allows us to not only access the physiological benefits of deliberate cold exposure, but it's an opportunity to navigate the space between stimulus and response. And that very uncomfortable stimulus of an ice bath and understanding that we have the power to choose our response. We can meet something as uncomfortable as a freezing cold bath of water with stoicism and grace. And when we do that as a training exercise, we find that can lead to more and more emotional regulation elsewhere in our life. All of a sudden, you're meeting traffic with stoicism and grace, and business with stoicism and grace, and relationships with stoicism and grace. And we are all bombarded with all of these stimuli around us, but understanding that we have more power than we tend to think that we do to choose our response in these situations. And that choice from that position is very powerful. And so that's where our Morozko comes from.
I love it. Very fitting name for the company, and also like a very fitting tale, because if you don't choose to surrender to what you're going through and you try to fight it, you're going to be humbled. And reflecting back now, actually, I went through this whole transformative process when I was actually giving up alcohol. I remember one of the very first posts after I deleted everything, went through this whole metamorphosis in my little cocoon. One of the first posts was me doing a cold plunge, and the caption was something along the lines of "Humble pie is a dish best served cold." So,
nice.
I remember following your stories for quite some time, and as I mentioned before the show, I would see a picture of you, I think at the airport or something like that. I can't remember the caption, the quote that you had on the picture specifically, and I think it was whiskey, something a little bit darker, but I saw you post that up, and reflecting back to my journey to when I gave up alcohol, I kind of felt like I was stepping into your shoes for a second, and I could almost foresee that you were going to give it up. So once I did see that you made the announcement, I was actually really happy for you. And listening to a previous podcast that you did on this topic before, you did so out of accountability, not so just out of like bragging rights or anything like that. You did so because you didn't want to internalize this thought process anymore. You needed a little bit more of an external, not validation, but you needed other people to witness what you were going through in order to like push you that way. So within the previous year, you've dropped alcohol. I believe the last time that I checked, you were 250 days alcohol free. That was September. And hopefully I don't sound like a stalker talking like this, but
not at all, man.
Can you recall the first time that you ever had a drink, and what role did alcohol play in your life as a young adult?
The first time that I ever had a drink, I guess, there's probably some sip of a beer when I was a kid, but if I'm talking about the first time that I ever drank, the first time I was ever drinking, that's got to be about age 15 at a high school party. That's the first time where, there are no adults around. It's not, Uncle so-and-so slipping you a sip of the beer at the family get together. It's just you and a bunch of teenagers, and somebody's brother has bought a bunch of alcohol, and the parents aren't in the house, and it's just, the nuts are in charge of the nut house. And so I've been thinking about that because you sent me these questions ahead of time, and that's what I would flag as the moment that I started drinking, that I became a drinker, it's interesting. I'm reading a book right now. I just started it called Magic Words. It's about, just the technology of language. Language is a very powerful technology. And there's a part in the beginning where it talks about the difference between nouns and verbs. And so we can say, I am drinking, or I can say, I am a drinker. I could say, I vote, or I can say, I'm a voter. Or, and so when we identify with these things, there's a difference. I can say that I'm athletic, or I can say I'm an athlete. There's all kinds of different examples here. So I'll say, 15 years old, my freshman year of high school, was probably the first time. And then it's interesting. I've been reflecting on this and thinking about how that affected or was influenced by social groups in the high school days. And so, I'm 44 now. My high school years were 1994 to 1998. And so this is pre-social media. The internet was barely turned on. Nobody except rich people had it. And so it was high school parties, and somebody's parents would be out of town, and these would be sporadic. And that's kind of the context that set it up. And there were social circles in my high school where drinking was like a competition. It was almost like, especially among the males, whoever could drink more was the winner, for some reason, or somebody would just get really shitty, drunk, growing up all over the place, and they'd be made fun of. But there was still a competition of who could drink the most, but not, be the fuck up, and so this kind of informed those social circles. And then, I joined the military when I was 19 years old. Joined the Army, and the military is definitely a drinking culture. Back then, you would still hear from the old timers, the guys who were, in their 40s, about how there used to be beer vending machines and at the unit, and it was just kind of the thing. Even at lunch, and you see old movies, from the Vietnam eras where they're drinking at war. That used to be a thing. It's not so much anymore, at least not in my experience. But yeah, and so it's very culturally ingrained, and there is kind of almost the person, and this is still true to a certain extent, although it's becoming less and less true, that the person who doesn't drink is almost like, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with me? But that's just where the culture is at, and I think that's a good place to end my rant there.
Yeah. It's around the same time that I started to around high school. I remember for my 16th birthday, I actually wanted to rent out a place on the beach with all my friends and just get lit. So you had about almost 30 years that you were a drinker, since we're being really mindful with our words. And I work with some teens, and this is the conversation that I hear that they're having in high school, same type of social settings and such. And it's who can drink the most without losing their shit, who can hold their liquor. It's like a little badge of honor that people get. And then once they go off to college, it's kind of the same thing. So I've talked about it with a previous guest on the show before, where this age around college, when we're transitioning, when we're moving away from home, now it's like frat life, sorority life, or in your case, military life, where it's just the thing to do. Like, that's how we have fun. And obviously this isn't telling people what to do, how they should live their lives, but me being a parent now too, it's like, does everyone need to go through this process? Do they need to go through this pseudo initiation, or is there a way to prevent it? Maybe conversations like this will, but I mean, kids are going to be kids. They're going to make their own mistakes. Sometimes you need to let them touch the stove. You got to let them get burned. They have to learn on their own. Ideally, hopefully, because I know that alcohol was definitely holding me back in certain areas of my life, which I definitely want to get into now. What impact was alcohol having on your relationships?
Recently, it was having a very negative impact on my relationships. Alcohol, I think about, I don't know if you've ever heard of the frog in the pot story. And for anybody who's not familiar, the idea is that if you put a frog in a pot of room temperature water, and then you turn the heat on the water, the frog will slowly boil to death, cook to death. But if you toss the frog in the pot when the water is already hot, it'll just jump right out. And so, like you said, 30 years of being a drinker, it's a long time. And there were good times, there were bad times. There were times when the drinking, I don't want to say the drinking affected relationships, because that blames the alcohol. But the drinking wasn't helping with the communication of other problems in relationships. It wasn't helping with other misalignments. And certainly that had become true in late 2022, because I walked away from alcohol in January of 2023 this year. And my marriage of 10 years has ended, and alcohol was certainly a context to that, and it was a driver of that, as a catalyst of that. Again, my alcohol consumption was not the only misalignment in that or any other relationships that didn't survive. But it didn't fucking help, and when I, as an individual, were bottling my emotions, my feelings, not speaking my voice, staying in something that was not aligned because I just wanted to hold on to it, and then to consume alcohol, then that just kind of releases the top of that bottle, and it's explosive, and not communicating very well, behaving badly, which I was. And so that's kind of where a big part of the decision to transition and step away from alcohol came from. And then, to talk to your point about, the kids being kids, I see, and again, I don't want to blame the alcohol. I don't want to say alcohol is bad and nobody should drink and alcohol should be outlawed or anything like that. Because I had a lot of fun with it, and I don't regret the times that I had fun with it, but it became this thing that I was using to numb out, and to not feel the things that I really needed to feel, the uncomfortable things that I really needed to feel. And then it got to a point, or was getting to a point, where it was just catalyzing explosiveness. And that's the truth. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it was very negatively affecting my relationships. I wasn't drinking socially anymore. I was drinking basically alone for the most part. It wasn't going out with friends to a ball game and having a great time and taking a cab and everybody's responsible and happy and joking around. I'm sitting on a bar stool in a dive bar, just numbing out until I didn't want to be in public anymore. And then just going home and continuing to numb out in private. So, yeah, and definitely was negatively influencing during those times.
Would you say, reflecting back now, that you were depressed, like drinking alone?
I don't know. I don't know if I would use the word depressed. Stressed, anxious, fearful, insecure. Those are the adjectives. If I'm thinking about, what were those feelings that I wanted to be numb from? And those are the feelings that I wanted to be numb from. So I don't know about depression or despair, but definitely anxious, stressed, fearful, insecure.
Mm-hmm. That was kind of your way to just like escape from whatever it is that you were avoiding at the time.
Yeah, it was a way to not feel, and to get into my day and to just numb out and be like, okay, I'm done feeling for today. Like I have felt enough today, and I'll get into the this might be a good time to say, like, when the decision came to finally step away from alcohol and make the announcement, because there was a conversation in my own head for I don't even know how long, maybe a year or two. There would be times where I would have the conversation internally with myself, say, Jason, maybe we should, stop drinking. But saying it out loud and posting about it, that made it real. And that did create an accountability. It still creates an accountability, which is good, which I want. But it was mid-January, and I was at an event at a resort in Scottsdale that I was helping support with an ice bath setup. This is during the transition where, my marriage was ending and not cohabitating with Adrian, sitting in a hotel room. And I got, to the end of my day, and I'm like, all right, emails are done for today. There's more to do tomorrow. I'm just going to, now comes the time. Now the 5 o'clock bell hit, even though it was probably only like 4:30. And I grabbed a little mini bottle of wine in the hotel room, and I opened it up and poured a glass, and I took a drink. And for the first time that I can remember feeling it this way, I could feel that the pain that I was carrying in my heart over everything that was going on in my life was numbed. Like, and the analogy that I say is, it reminded me of like those old Pepto-Bismol commercials, where the animation is like the coating of the stomach, the one that coats is the only one that you need. But it was my heart, and it was the pain that was in my heart. And I could feel it, like that sip of wine was just like that coating. And I understood that it didn't release the pain. The pain didn't go away. The problems that I was facing in my life, they weren't gone. I was just not feeling it. I was just masking symptoms, which is an interesting thing, because everything that I do with the ice bath company and with the projection of, seeking human health and wellness, like I said, is to pull back on the symptom management culture of just masking symptoms. Our symptoms are they're signals. They're signals that are very sophisticated signals that our bodies have adapted to send us when something is wrong, when something is out of alignment. And, an extreme example is if a person literally can't feel pain and they put their hand on a hot burner, like, I can't feel this. Well, it's still going to cause you damage. Like the pain signal is there for a reason. The discomfort is there for a reason. And, there's levels of this where reducing suffering is absolutely the right thing to do. If the only thing you can do for a person is reduce their suffering, the only thing you can do for, the soldier dying on a battlefield is shoot them up full of heroin because that's the last thing that they're ever going to fucking feel. Fine. But out of those extreme situations, that's my projection. That's what I work in is like, don't mask the symptom, sit with the symptom, feel the pain, feel the discomfort, understand, or at least seek understanding of what that signal is trying to send to you. Where is the misalignment? Where is your hand proverbially on the burner? And what do you need to take off? What adjustment do you need to make? And so that was a big part of it. And that was the moment that I said, feeling that coding and understanding that like the pain is still there. The problems are still there. It's not solving anything for me. It's just masking a symptom. I said, this is the moment. The next morning I woke up and that was when I posted, like, I'm stepping away from alcohol.
I like that you don't necessarily blame alcohol. Like, it was the catalyst, but either way, it's just a tool and it's based off how people are going to use it. So in a lot of cases, in your case and previously in mine as well, it was used as a way to kind of numb out and not address some things. So you say that you kind of had this internal talk for a while now, but did anyone ever in your circle, did they ever mention something to you along the lines that, hey, maybe I think you should cut back, or this is becoming a problem?
I mean, over the span of 30 years, there were some times when drinking had also been problematic. It's all a broad spectrum. It's all, a long story. And there, like I said, there were times when drinking was great and times drinking was not so great. There were some times where people would comment on the drinking, especially the extreme drinking. Certainly Adrian had mentioned a few times towards the end that the drinking was becoming problematic. And also in retrospect, I had gotten really good at being drunk but not being a problem. And I bartended for a number of years. And so I was very attuned to the signals of when a person was, getting too intoxicated and was going to be a problem, just the way that they speak and the way that they repeat phrases and their stumbling of their actions. And again, in retrospect, I've gotten really good at like shutting my mouth and, not, and moving with intention and not knocking shit over. It doesn't mean that I wasn't completely fucking wasted. It was just meant that I was numb and still and silent. And, those skills definitely, I lost those skills towards the end, again, because it just had gotten so extreme. And yeah, I don't blame the alcohol. It's important for me. It's important for me to take personal responsibility, for my situation and my actions, my words. Like I'm not going to blame the booze. That was me. And I had a good friend of mine tell me, and he put it really eloquently, that he invited me to even have gratitude for the alcohol, because, and this gets into not slipping into regrets. He said, Jason, can you thank the alcohol? Can you thank that molecule? Can you say, thank you? I needed you, because there were so many times in my life when I couldn't bear feeling, because I wasn't ready to swim out into the ocean of my full being. And the alcohol provided me a rock to swim back to, and something to hold on to, and something to anchor, and something to hold me when I needed to feel held, and I wasn't ready to hold myself or to be held by those around me. And can you sit with that, and can you say thank you for what you provided me, but I don't need that anymore. I'm ready to feel. I'm ready to swim out into the full expression of my being without that safety, without that place to swim back to. And that's been really powerful for me. And something that I always say in these conversations too is like, this is my journey and this is what has worked for me. It's a very not Alcoholics Anonymous journey. There are one of the things I like about our modern culture and our ability to connect in micro communities and digital spaces and things like that is now we have more projections of a pathway to making changes in our life, whether that's alcohol or fitness or substances or anything like that. It's not so, well, you fucked up too much with drinking, and so now you go to AA meetings because that's what you do. Because that was just kind of never something that resonated with me, is like the AA kind of mindset of the alcohol is the problem and I'm powerless against it. It's just not something that calls to me, but it's a great program that helps a lot of people. This is just what's worked for me.
So you didn't feel like you ever needed that. And did you just go cold turkey or did you wean off?
It was cold turkey. Yeah. That morning, I think it was January 17th or something like that. I just looked at my counter. It's been 294 days. I don't look at the counter very often anymore. It's just an app I have on my phone that counts the days. But yeah, I just decided that I was done with it. And some things that were helpful for me were the lessons that I learned quitting smoking cigarettes. So I smoked cigarettes from age 15 to age 29. And, they were harder to get when I was 15 years old, but I was pretty quick to get to like a pack a day habit. And I had made attempts to quit smoking earlier at other points in my 20s, but the time that it finally stuck, there were some key things that were very helpful in that. And one of them was understanding that cravings are temporary. They're actually very fleeting. With a nicotine addiction, they say it's like 2 to 3 minutes. So I don't know if you've ever been addicted to nicotine or cigarettes, but a nicotine fit is fucking awful. Like, it's probably one of the worst withdrawals that I've ever felt in my entire life of any substance I've ever done, is especially if you're really in a nicotine addiction, where I just remember, like, you just feel like you're going to die if you don't get that next cigarette. But that's not forever. That's, you tend to think like, shit, this is my life now. Now my life feels this way. But no, they only last like 2 to 3 minutes. So if you can ride that out, it's helpful. And the other lesson that I carried forward is don't cheat. And this gets into like, the dabbling or whatever. The previous times that I tried to quit smoking cigarettes, it didn't stick because I cheated, because I, was out drinking. And I'm like, well, I'm just going to have one cigarette while I'm drinking. I'm just going to bum a cigarette at the bar. But then I don't want to feel like a bum, so I'm going to buy a pack at the cigarette machine because they still had those then. And then the next thing I know, like, all of a sudden I've got a cigarette pack and a lighter in my pocket again. So, don't cheat. Don't convince myself that I can just have one and be okay. And the other thing that was helpful is remembering how, because when I was a cigarette smoker, like, cigarette smoke tasted good. Cigarette smoke smelled good. It was about 3 or 4 months after I quit cigarettes that association in my brain flipped. And all of a sudden I'd smell somebody smoking a cigarette. I'm like, holy shit, that doesn't smell good anymore. Or, because it wasn't a perfect execution. There were a couple of times where I took like a drag of a cigarette and like, holy shit, like that tastes awful. Or, you meet a girl and she's a smoker and all of a sudden you're like, wow, is this what I smelled like? Is this what it tasted like to kiss me? Yeah, it was. But it's the brain's association, because when we have those addictions, the brain associates that stimulus with the response. It rewards us because it's rewarding us for feeding our addiction. And it associates that smell or that taste with satisfying the addictive craving. And so, interestingly, because I will be out at like bars, restaurants, or in social situations where people are drinking, red wine still smells fucking delicious. But things like beer, if I smell like there's like somebody's drinking a beer and nearby me at a restaurant, I'm like, doesn't even smell good anymore. And so it's interesting navigating those changes to our cognitive, our brain's association with those scents and those tastes and things like that.
So it seemed like you were a high functioning drinker. And I just want to make this statement really quick for anyone that's like truly an alcoholic. I've heard in the past, back when I worked in like an outpatient surgical center, one of them was one of the ladies worked with addiction or people that were trying to break addictions. And she mentioned that coming off of alcohol was probably one of the worst withdrawal symptoms. Like people can actually die doing so. So if you are at that level, please seek some help. I just want to clear the air with that one. And it seemed for you that the best way was to be abstinent, to abstain completely from it. I mentioned before the show that I quit for probably over 2 years. And then just recently, like if I go out for sushi, I'll have my little sake. And then if I have guests over, we'll have wine to celebrate because I just made a proposal. And even then I don't really feel too good, but that's my way of dabbling. Were you ever tempted to take a drink when you were in those environments? You said that it smelled disgusting and the wine smelled great, but any like social pressure come up?
A little bit, but that just gets into, the craving is fleeting, and just to sit with it, to notice it, identify it, and remind myself, and this gets back into the associations, that the idea is better than the reality. For me, the idea is better than the reality. And it was and still is very powerful for me to be in those social situations, to be around alcohol and people drinking, and to choose not to, because I feel like I won, especially in the beginning, because I didn't just want to, become a hermit and not be in social situations. And alcohol consumption still is a huge part of our culture. And thankfully, more and more there are opportunities for sober social situations, other types of social situations. But it is still a big part of our culture. And you're going to go to networking events and there's going to be alcohol. You're going to go to parties and there's going to be alcohol. You're going to go to concerts or whatever and there's going to be alcohol. So it was important for me to still do those things because I didn't want to feel like making different choices with alcohol consumption meant that I had to, isolate myself. That wouldn't be helpful. That wouldn't work out very well. And so every time I would go out to something like that and not drink, even if I had a little twinge or a little idea that maybe I can handle it this time, or who's really looking, I don't know anybody at this party or whatever. The idea is better than the reality. The reality is that as a drinker, I was never really good at only having a couple of drinks. I would say I would have 0 drinks or I would have 12 drinks, but anything in between, I just didn't like very much. If I'm going to drink, I'm going to fucking drink. And so just understanding that the idea is different than the reality for me. And being able to be surrounded by people, they seem like they're having a good time. They're drinking responsibly. Like I said, they're with friends, they're joking, they're laughing, they're smiling, they're feeling good. They're not, they're not shitty. They're not, driving intoxicated. But understanding that, without observation, without judgment, that's their journey. That's where they're at. And that's not who I am as a drinker. That's not who Jason became as a drinker. And so that was also very helpful and very powerful in those situations. And I don't think that I will ever dabble in it again. I can see myself running an experiment someday. Maybe after like a year, where I see what a glass of wine tastes like or something like that. I don't know. Maybe I will, maybe I won't, but I don't like to speak in absolutes. But that's just getting, in that moment, I would only be seeking to gather data of like, okay, will that one glass of wine lead to 2 bottles of wine? Will it even taste good anymore? Will I have broken that association where it's like that one drag of a cigarette that I took 3 years after I quit smoking cigarettes? Like, oh my God, this is fucking awful. But I can't imagine ever being a drinker again, ever having that regular habit or that being in that cycle of the daily to near daily alcohol consumption. There's just been too much positive outcome over the last 294 days of stepping away from it. So I don't see myself ever returning to drinker status. And outside of maybe a brief experiment to run with what does a sip of, Cabernet taste like after so long, I can't imagine ever dabbling. There's plenty of non-alcoholic beverages to grab and toast to. And I just feel so much better now. And that's another thing that was analogous to the cigarette smoking. As a cigarette smoker, I didn't understand how bad I felt as a cigarette smoker because I started when I was 15 years old, started as a child. When I decided to quit, I was a man. And I didn't understand how bad I felt because it was just normal to me. It wasn't until you get the thorn out of the side, until you're far enough away from it, you're like, man, I didn't know I could just feel this good. I didn't know that I could sleep this well. And that's been very true with alcohol, where I didn't have a conscious understanding of how sluggish I was, and how I stopped getting what the average person would call a hangover when I was probably in my late 20s, early 30s. But I was still hungover. Maybe I was always hungover. Maybe that's why I stopped getting hangovers, because what I stopped doing is stopped recovering from the hangover. And it wasn't so much a splitting headache and, my head in the toilet bowl throwing up, but it was just reduced energy, reduced cognitive load, reduced ability to connect and feel. And again, it goes back to that frog in the pot. At what point did the pot start boiling? I don't know. And it certainly wasn't a linear pathway. Somebody was I was turning up the fire, and then turning it back down, and then turning it up high, and then turning it down to whatever. It's very complex. But being this far away from it, my sleep is a lot better. Most of the time, my energy is a lot better. I've been so thankful that when the problems to solve in business or life or finances or whatever come up, I have gratitude. I'm like, gosh, this problem sucks. I gotta find some fucking solutions to this problem because that's my job. And thankfully, I am addressing this with a clear mind. Thankfully. That when I got that text from an employee that there's something wrong at the shop, that I'm not already, 6 beers deep. Thankfully, when something popped up in the morning, that I'm not coming off of a late night of drinking, because now whatever solutions that I can think of, imagine, implement, they're going to be better. They're not going to be perfect, because I'm not perfect. But what I have to offer to my business, to my social circles, to my friend groups, to whatever it is that I have to offer in the world is improved, because I am improved. I am not numbed. I am sharper. I am cleaner. I am clearer. And that has certainly been true over the last, going on 11 months now.
I really like that quote that you kept using, that the idea is better than the reality. That one really hits with me, because that's what I feel pretty much when I've experimented. So you actually brought up a few stories for myself, where the last day that I really was a drinker before this dabbling where I'll have like a glass of wine or so, was Christmas. And it's actually going to lead to the next question. But I'm adopted and I never met my biological family at all. And I realized that my escape was alcohol for this very reason. Like, I didn't know. Everyone had always told me growing up, it's like, I think you should meet your biological family. I think you should meet your mom. And I kind of said, no, it's fine. I don't need to do that. Meanwhile, Christmas Day, I drove up to meet my biological father and his family, and I spent Christmas with him, and it was the most amazing experience. But before going up there, I actually had it wasn't like a Mike's Hard, but it was maybe like a White Claw or some gay drink like that. And I had it in the car. I was going to drink
cheerleader beer,
like one of the lamest drinks that you could possibly drink. I'm going to get arrows shot at me with this one, but I had it with me and I was going to drink it before driving up there. Terrible idea, but I threw it out and I had a great experience. It was a sober experience and it was very enlightening and relieving. Honestly, I feel like I got a lot of closure to certain things that I didn't know were there for years because I was masking it, as you kept mentioning. It was a numbing agent. So I'm very surprised that you were able to go into these environments and you didn't really want to, I guess, isolate yourself and become a hermit. And one of the tips that I heard from one of my clients actually is that what he'll do at these social events is if he doesn't want to feel awkward, he'll just grab a cup and he'll just hold it the entire time. Maybe it'll have like ice or water in it, but that's it. So it looks like he has something and people aren't going to make fun of him. It's like, oh, with the whole machismo thing, you're not drinking. It's like, I'm 10 down, whatever it is. So that may be a tip for other people. And I'm surprised that you actually were brave enough to go back into these environments. Did you ever feel awkward? Like, what do I do with my hands type thing?
Oh, all the time. And the cup thing is that's an interesting idea because I find that all of a sudden, like, I'm overhydrating because I'm crushing water or like soda water and cranberry. It's great. You know, it's not that I feel like I need to signal to other people, but it is like, what do I do with my hands? You know, and all of a sudden I'm just drinking 12 soda waters and I'm like, God, now I'm just fucking way overhydrated. And, you know, I got to piss, you know, every 5 seconds. And yeah, it's, you know, it's not a linear pathway and, yeah, it's super awkward. Like, not just, you know, holding something in my hand, but, a big part of the awkwardness is speaking my voice. Like, how do I initiate a conversation? How do I participate in a conversation? You know, and my experience is most of the people around me who are consuming alcohol, they're doing it responsibly. They're not, you know, shit-faced or anything like that. So I can have a conversation with them. You know, every once in a while you run into somebody who's just repeating the same thing over and over again and be like, okay, you're really in it. And, you know, I can't have a conversation with you because you just keep asking me the same question over and over again. You know, there for the grace of God went I. But most of the people I'm around, you know, they're socializing, they're having fun, they're having conversations, they're talking about books and meditation and life and music and all sorts of things that I want to have a conversation about. But this is the discomfort for me is sitting with that awkwardness and that blockage in my voice and working through that. And, you know, again, now that I'm single, how do you date? Like, I'm 44, I'm single and I'm sober. Like, how do I even have those conversations? I don't know how sober seduction even begins. But
it sounds boring.
It sounds frightening to me. You know, it sounds, you know, anxiety driven, sounds, you know, vulnerable. It sounds a lot of things, you know, because when I was young, when I was in my 20s, yeah, it was social lubricant, you know, it made things easier. Right. But again, do the hard thing. And so finding the opportunity, staying in the social situation, because there were some times where I'd be like, okay, I'm at this party, I'm here for an hour, I'm doing the Irish exit, I'm not even saying goodbye, I'm fucking out of here, you know. I talked to nobody, but I did it. I did the thing, right? I dipped my toes in the water, but I'm looking for the next opportunity, and I've had some amazing times, amazing conversations where I realized that that it's up to me. It's up to me to speak my voice. It's up to me to initiate a conversation. I can't just stand in the corner and wait for the conversations to come to me. I have to ask people questions. Hey, how's it going? You know, what are you passionate about? What are you working on? Hey, I noticed that you are wearing this type of shoe, and I remember this type of shoe from another time that I saw this type of shoe. Whatever, I'm making shit up. But it's awkward. It's awkward as fuck. And it's something that I still work on. I still am socially awkward as fuck. I still struggle to go to social situations and have conversations, initiate conversations, stay involved in conversations. It's still something that I'm very much working on. And I've had amazing positive feedback and results for the things that I have been, the times that I have been able to lean into that and have those conversations. And again, this gets back to the fantasy of Jason as a drinker is not aligned with the reality, because again, at the end of my drinker identity, I was not drinking in a social situation. I was not drinking and having conversations about art and music and life and what I'm passionate about. There were times in my life when I was, and I'm grateful for those times. Again, I have gratitude for the safety that the alcohol provided me in those situations, but that wasn't the reality anymore. Not for me. I wasn't going to parties and having a couple of drinks and having those conversations. I was the guy who was like repeating the same thing over and over again and not really aware of the situation. It had just gotten to be that frog in the pot, and that's the frog is boiling. And so, yeah, it's difficult. It's tough. And again, it's just, that's, the obstacle is the way, that is the pathway. That is the thing to do. That is the discomfort to sit in. That is the thing to meet with stoicism and grace. And yeah, definitely grace is a big word that I think about. And just taking that next step, lifting that next weight, it's not about, I'm not really a gym going person. I would like to become one more, but as I understand it, you don't just go in there and pick up the heaviest fucking thing. You gotta exercise those muscles. You gotta stretch that out. It's, form's gonna suck, but you just keep going and keep working on it and keep tuning it in. And it's something that I'm working on, and it is a process.
It seems like you have leaned out significantly though, since you did drop the booze. Physically? Yeah.
Yeah. Interestingly, the numbers on the scale aren't that much lower. I was sitting around 175, 180. Now I fluctuate between around 170. But yeah, I can see there was just so much inflammation that got, reduced down, or so much water weight, so much wine weight. And to see, because I've always been a thin person, I've never struggled with having to keep my weight in check. I weighed 135 pounds when I was 19 years old. As tall as I am now, 5'11", going into the Army, weighing 135 pounds. And I've never really gotten past the 180, 185 mark. And yeah, the numbers on this, I'd like to be bigger, have more time and energy for that. But yeah, and I like the way that I look, even though I have slimmed down a little bit. It's a good slim. Yeah, it's not.
Have you had your testosterone checked? Because I know Tom's big on that with the cold plunges.
I haven't recently. That is something else that I could circle around back to and see what kind of where I'm at with that. There's so many different things that I do. And so that would be interesting. As I'm getting older, stepped away from alcohol, working on my own, stress levels, things like that. It would be interesting to get that checked into. I have to make an appointment there.
Since you mentioned experimenting earlier, maybe after a year or so, it reminded me of my first drink after I cut it out was when my fiance moved into my apartment. She brought over a bottle of wine, and I was going through this whole ketogenic phase at the time. So I was low carb. And for those that don't know, at least in my experience, when I went ketogenic in the past and I had a drink, like I was a super, super lightweight, like one drink, heavy beer, and I'm good. I'm buzzed. So I had 2 glasses of wine and I was done. Like I was on the bed, my stomach was in knots, and I pretty much had almost like an instant hangover. So now this is just my experiment, and I would be very interested in hearing what you experience if you do decide to try ISO in the future. Even if I have like a little bit of sake with my sushi or one little glass of wine, I'll notice I won't have a hangover or anything. It's not nearly as bad as it was that first time. But for almost like 2 to 3 days afterwards, my motivation and my drive just like plummets. And I'm kind of getting this funk and this fog. And I'm like, why am I feeling this way right now? It's like, oh, and it happens pretty much every damn time. So that's a lesson in myself. The idea is not better than the reality, or the idea is better than the reality. Sorry, got that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the realization that I had was that I was using alcohol as a tool to kind of mask something from my early childhood. And that's not the only reason. Obviously, there was other things that I was avoiding at the time. I was using as a numbing agent. Did you ever come across, or did things come up for you mentally once you cut it out and now it just like came to the forefront? Similar to, I guess, I know you dabble with psychedelics, or at least I've heard that you have. So I do microdoses, and I'll get like these thoughts and these downloads, I suppose I would call them, where it's like, that's why I do that. Or now I understand why this person does that a little bit more. So did certain things come up for you once you dropped the booze?
I'm sure that the answer to that question is yes. I don't know that I can think of anything specific. The phrase download is big in the culture, with people who are in the psychedelic culture, like an epiphany, a download, some sort of thing that was not in my forefront of awareness previously. And I don't know if there were any big, strong epiphanies. I'm sure there were. I'd have to thumb through my journal and find them. But mostly what's coming up for me right now is, again, just increasing my sharpness, my ability to address what is going on around me from a clearer, more energetic, more emotionally regulated place. And so it wasn't that, there was some sort of, download of a solution to a problem. It's just the solution to the problem in front of me was better informed, was sharper, it was clearer. So that's just kind of what's coming up for me. I can't recall any specific epiphanies or anything like that, although I'm sure they exist.
Less overall noise, less static.
Yeah, that sounds right.
So within the past 11 months, would you say that you've been more productive, or you've had more ease with your work, with relationships, whether that be with a significant other or just like your friendships? Do things come easier now for you?
I wouldn't say easier. I would say I've been more productive. I think there was a lot of correlation is not causation, and who knows what the cause and the effect is, but there's a lot of procrastination when I was a drinker of, things that were getting put off or put on the back burner, or not being addressed, or at least not being addressed, in as quick a turnaround. And that has certainly improved. I have to watch out. I have to make sure that I'm still taking breaks and that I'm allowing myself the grace to rest. I think that is a download. Is that when I need to rest, I need to rest, because one of the things I was using alcohol to do was to turn it off at the end of the day. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm in a very fast growing business. There's a lot to do. The task list is never done. I have to be the one who says, okay, the urgent things are now handled. There's important things that need to be handled. I have to manage those flows. One of the things that I needed to have grace for myself is when I needed to rest, because to step away from the alcohol doesn't just mean that I'm going to be working 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's not good for me either. I need to reset. I need to step away from it in different ways, in more healthy ways. And that has also led to an increase in productivity, and understanding that if I take if I rest for an afternoon, everything that needs to be handled is going to be handled better the next day than if I'm just in this constant grind process. And the comment that's coming up for me now is, if we're serving from a depleted cup, and whether I was a drinker or a workaholic or whatever, if my offering is coming from a depleted state, then my offering is depleted. We don't have to, but I invite people to, sit and think about, fill our own cups first, so that what we have is spilling over from that full cup. And that's something that I still remind myself of and still have to manage, because nobody tells me, Jason, you get to punch out and you're done with your work for today, and the task list is done and there'll be more tomorrow. It's just kind of this constant blending of work-life balance, and it's all just life. It's up to me to say, this has been handled. I've done enough today. I need to rest. And when I come back after the rest, my solutions will be sharper. My offering will be better, because I have filled my own cup.
That's a really hard message for, I feel like, a lot of men, and just any entrepreneur, like anyone that's type A and really, really driven, because you have a lot of weight on your shoulders. And some analogy that I use, because I work with athletes, just like speed training and such, I tell them that the only reason why Ferraris and supercars can go so fast is because they have a superior brake system. Otherwise, if you're always like pedal to the metal and hitting the gas, eventually you're going to go off the cliff. Eventually you're going to crash and you're going to hit a wall. And then nothing is really productive. Everything starts to break down with it. So to kind of turn off, we do need some other tools in our system. Did you use the ice bath at all? Would you say the plunges helped you?
Yes. They do. They're a great tool for an emotional reset, the nervous system reset. They can help with, they help me with anxiety, with stress. And so using those, I always say it's ironic being an ice bath entrepreneur, because an ice bath become both the cause of and the solution to all of my stress. I'm so stressed out about everything going on in the ice bath business. So then I go into the ice bath to relieve my stress about the ice bath business. But yeah, it's a major, therapy that I use.
Did you have any friends that were helping keep you accountable, or was it just all yourself?
What's been very positive is, and I don't post about the journey so much anymore, but when I post about it, there's a lot of amazing feedback, and there've been a good amount of people who have reached out to me in private message privately, and I've had talks and meetings with them, because they're navigating their own relationship with alcohol, or they'll just send me side messages and say, that's really helped me kind of think about my own relationship with alcohol, and that's been very helpful. And sometimes I'll hear from people. I'm like, oh my God, I didn't even know you followed me. And it's some old friend that doesn't like or comment on the rest of my stuff, but somehow was pulled into these posts. And I'm like, I haven't seen that name pop up in a long time. And so that's all very positive feedback. And I do remind myself, because I've always struggled with the whole social media projection, and there's so much content out there, and sometimes it can feel like, am I just tooting my own horn? Am I just or how do I navigate or stay out of not let the ego take over and be too prideful about whatever it is, and reminding myself that it is helpful to people when I can share my voice in a way where I project what has been helpful and healthful for me, and people tell me that they find value in that, and that's helpful as well.
Yeah, as I mentioned before the show, you never really know who's watching or listening, and this is the exact reason I like to have these type of conversations, is because you're finding your voice now, and you may actually be speaking for people that don't have their own voice, and they're kind of using alcohol as a crutch, or maybe some other substance as a crutch, in order to numb and mask out, to say the things that they don't know how to say, but we're able to kind of tell through stories. So hopefully it resonates and it's with some other people. So would you say, now this is the last question that I have for you today. I know that when I was partying, and this is true for me, it may not be true for you, but in my 20s, when I was out clubbing, when I was drinking, and I could put down a ton, I was like a fish. What I realized in hindsight was that if I needed some external substance in order to have fun, that I probably wasn't actually having fun.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have more fun now that you feel healthier, more cognitively alert, clear, healthier, or do you feel like you're boring?
The boredom is still something that I'm navigating. And that's a comment that I hear from other people who reach out to me. They're like, man, how do you deal with the boredom? Like, I keep trying to take a break or step away from it, but I just get so fucking bored. And that's a real thing. That is a very real thing. And this goes back into ideas being different from realities and changing the cognitive whatever. I heard or read somewhere, I think maybe Adrienne mentioned it to me once, that she had read somewhere, that, yeah, especially when you step away from alcohol, you're going to go through a period of extreme boredom, because depending on how long and to what extreme you were a drinker, you've been bombarding your mind, your body with these feel good, with this having fun. And yeah, I had a lot of fun. There was a lot of fun to be had. And yes, I do believe that I was having fun. The idea, and I'm still testing this hypothesis, is that if you get far enough away from it, then that perception of fun and enjoying life comes back without the alcohol, because it wasn't the alcohol or the substance that was creating the fun. It was catalyzing, facilitating, bringing down barriers. That the idea is we can bring down these barriers ourselves, that we can go on a journey. It's not an easy journey. It's not a fast journey. And I'm still in it. 294 days later, I still struggle with boredom. And I wonder, I'm like, shit, am I just a fucking old fuddy-duddy now? Am I just getting old? My blood is calm. I don't want to stay up past 9 p.m. anymore. I'm going to yell at the kids on my lawn. Or can I get to a place where maybe it's not the same activities. Maybe it's not, fucking going to, EDM concerts or anything like that till 5 a.m. Maybe it's not the same experiences that are leading to those ecstatic states, those feelings of connection and joy. Maybe it's different. Maybe it's a gym community, or hiking, or hunting, or whatever the activity is. but getting to a place where that lust for life returns, that joy, that, everything that I experienced in positive times of drinking comes back. And I've had some return to that at certain times. There's usually psychedelics involved in that. And so then we can get into, am I just, switching one thing for another thing? And that's been a part of my pathway as well, although I've mostly stepped away from the recreational psychedelics. And so I don't know, it's still an experiment I'm running. Because I do want that lust for life back to whatever extent as I approach my mid 40s and into my 50s I can get, which I think I can. I'm still a pretty, healthy, vital guy. But it's a process. And again, I think of the word grace because I have grace for myself when in the moments that a big part of some self criticism maybe is the right word is when I first stepped away from alcohol, I found myself like I'm just laying on the couch in the evenings, smoking pot and watching cartoons. Like that's not the life that I want to live. My sugar increased, my sugar intake increased. I had a little bit of a gummy bear addiction for a while, which I've also moved away from. There've been replacements. There've been replacement addictions, anywhere from bong rips in South Park to bags of gummy bears to ketamine, numbing out with ketamine for a little while. I had to really kind of step away from that to spending, shopping. There's all kinds of different things that we can grab onto, and we can criticize ourselves and be like, well, fuck, man, I just traded the wine for pot, and I'm just laying on the couch, still not socializing. But I didn't want to let perfection be the enemy of improvement, and understand like I can incrementally, switch the wine for the gummy bears. Okay, now step away from the gummy bears. Okay, you need, dabble in some ketamine. Okay, but now let's put that away. And oh shit, my credit card bills have gotten pretty big because I find myself in a retail therapy replacement. Okay, now it's time to pay down the debt, and just kind of not judging myself and not feeling like because I replaced one thing with another thing for a temporary period of time that I failed, or that I was shameful, or that I'm just doing replacement addictions. And so that was helpful, not only in moving away from the thing that I wanted to move away from, alcohol, but then moving away from the other things that I found like, oh shit, this has popped up as a replacement. Now I need to address this, and then move away from that. Like, oh shit, now what am I replacing it with? Okay, well now let's address that. And so that's been a big part of this journey. And yeah, the boredom and it's something to manage, but I have grace for myself in those times when I just need to be bored and understand again that this is an epiphany that here we go back to this. Here's the download, that I found myself judging myself for laying on the couch, smoking pot and watching cartoons as like a replacement. And I'm like, well, this isn't the life that I want to be. But I had to remind myself that, again, when I was a drinker, towards the end, I wasn't an active drinker. I wasn't going to the ballpark with friends. I wasn't, socializing and laughing and having a good time with friends. I was sitting on a bar stool, like numbed out, and then going home and being on the couch numbed out. I wasn't doing different things. I just felt numb about those times that I would have otherwise been bored. So the activities were almost the same. And I had to remind myself like that. I'm like, Jason, you were just drunk watching fucking Star Wars for the 50th time. So if you're now stoned watching season 9 of South Park for the 50th time, have some fucking grace for yourself. You're not failing because you're on this journey and you still have these other decisions and choices to make and things to navigate. And just, again, don't let perfection be the enemy of improvement. Don't expect to walk into the gym and fucking start bench pressing 200 pounds, start where you start, make the improvements where you make, get those gains however they come, and then move on to, what's the next thing? What's the next thing to do?
So it's like a slow weaning off process. And generally when you remove something, you have to replace it with something else, or generally you're going to fall back to it. And what you said about the boredom kind of reminds me of, it was Alex Ramosi that I believe said this. He said, when you're making a transformation, or when you're in the middle of a transition, you're kind of in this middle ground. It's like no man's land, where you don't exactly fit in maybe with the group that you did before. And this could just be yourself, like your past self. And you're not confident enough, or you're not able enough to fit in with a new group yet. So you're just kind of stuck in the middle while you're learning these new skills, these new tools, before, not necessarily mastery, but before you can get recognition from this other group that now you can go over here, if that makes a little bit of sense. And
it does, yeah.
So that's kind of where you're at. And I mean, I was stuck in that phase too, where things were just awkward. And what really helped me out the most was, and this is still something I practice to this day, was just being like super present and finding the smallest things to really be happy about and joyful about. So that may include going out on a hike with a little bit of a microdose and literally just staring at a flower, listening to a river. Like that brings me a shit ton of joy even to this day. And I could do so sober. Like I don't need my phone. I don't need a whole lot. And I'll just be out at the beach. I'll be listening to the waves. I'll be watching the waves. And that brings me a whole shit ton of joy. And I don't really need anything else besides that, just to be present in that moment. So I believe the boredom will subside. It's just kind of where you're at the moment. And again, I really appreciate you sharing your story, because I feel like these are the conversations that, if we're able to be vulnerable, can help others find their way.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, and look forward to continuing this journey and continuing to exercise the voice.
I look forward to following it, brother.
All right, man.
All right, brother. Thank you so much for sharing, Jay.
Yeah. We'll talk soon.
God bless.